Well, looking at the international newspapers, starting off with Turkish citizens living abroad. They've started voting in this controversial referendum on constitutional change, haven't they, Flo?
And pollsters say it's going to be a very tight race. Let's take a look at the front page of Hurriyet Daily News, so the English language version of Hurriyet. You can see this headline. It's still neck and neck, according to pollsters. So that's between the yes camp and the no camp. Voters are being asked whether they want to consolidate power into an executive-style presidential system. So Turkish citizens abroad have started voting now, and in Turkey, they're going to vote on April 16th. Big vote there.
Yeah, yes victory, of course, will give much more power, won't it, to Erdogan? This is the figure that is incredible, really. It allows him to stay in power until 2029. And a movie's come out recently looking back at some of the highlights of his life.
Some of the highlights of his life. The movie is called Race, which means the boss, and you can read more about it here in L'Humanité, the communist paper here in France. It's been playing in about 300 movie theaters across the country since March 3rd. You can see L'Humanité saying essentially it's about his heroic life. A lot of critics say it's essentially pro-Erdogan propaganda. It's a glorifying film that cost about 8 million euros, and it's being met with very mixed reviews. According to L'Humanité, people essentially aren't really flocking to see it. In fact, some movie theaters have dropped it from their program. This article quotes a Turkish filmmaker, Merve Gezen, who says it's a financial, aesthetic, and technical catastrophe. So I'm kind of curious to see it now.
Yes, exactly. Go and see it if you want to. Let's move to Yemen now. Yesterday, tens of thousands of people taking to the streets there of the capital, calling for an end to war in the country. It's 2 years after the beginning of the Saudi-led military operation. Let's
start with a paper in Yemen. This is Mareb, which, keep in mind, is a pro-government paper that's in favor of this Saudi-led operation. Now, this article paints a very bright picture of this military operation and says, look, after 2 years, it's fulfilled most of its military objectives and it's secured the strategic interests of the Yemeni people, for instance, protecting ports and oil fields. And not only that, according to this article, the Saudi-led operation in Saudi Arabia is providing humanitarian relief. So quite a glowing picture there of that operation.
Other papers being a little bit darker about it, perhaps, though.
Let's take a look at Le Monde, which says that essentially the Yemeni government and Saudi Arabia are using the weapon of hunger to try and stamp out the rebellion, the Houthi rebellion. For instance, they're talking about this blockade in the rebel-held port of Hodeidah, which could really worsen this threat of a famine. According to Le Monde, over 7 million people are in urgent need of food in Yemen. Almost 500,000 children, for instance, are already suffering from serious malnutrition.
Now, the Pentagon is looking to increase support for Saudi Arabia. The British paper, The Independent, wonders what's next for Yemen here.
It's a really interesting article in The Independent that points out that, look, these Arab Gulf states want to win the war in Yemen, but we should be a little worried about what that victory would look like. According to The Independent, the last thing the world needs in the Middle East is another country torn to pieces and rackled by sectarian violence, which could happen if this victory indeed happens. And essentially, this would be kind of a field for Islamist groups to take over, essentially.
Another big story in the press now, going to go to Hong Kong, electing a new leader. Carrie Lam has been elected the first female chief executive.
Let's start with the pun of the day, which is in the South China Morning Post. Keep calm and carry on. Carrie Lam will not have an election. Very good, I must admit, pretty good here. She's not going to have an election, well, post-election honeymoon, though, according to the South China Morning Post. She has a very low popularity rate, first of all, and she has to mend some very deep social and political rifts, and also deal, of course, with the relationship with China. Now, her election comes amid claims that there was China meddling. A lot of critics say it was no surprise that she was going to win. You can see this is Harry's View, which is the political cartoon in the South China Morning Post. You can see her saying, oh my God, I won this election. Meanwhile, that big, I must say, quite a big menacing Chinese panda there saying, who could have known she was going to win this election?
Speaking of China, Carrie Lam's election is front page news there, and also getting a lot of attention elsewhere as well.
Well, let's take a look, first of all, at the front page of the China Daily, where you can see they're focusing on the positive aspect of this election, that it's the first female chief to be elected here. The Wall Street Journal, the American paper, is also looking at Hong Kong's new new boss. More trouble is ahead if Carrie Lam won't defend the local autonomy. Her record, though, doesn't really inspire confidence that she'll put up a fight with Beijing, according to the Wall Street Journal.
Last but not least, we're going to go to the US. Donald Trump, of course, suffering this major setback on Friday after his healthcare bill was withdrawn.
That's right. It happened on Friday, but papers are still reacting today. Lots of hand-rubbing and celebrating going on in left-wing papers. You can see The Guardian here saying it's a welcome failure for a damaging plan. And meanwhile, the New York Times is focusing on what it calls a Republican existential crisis that's exploded on the national scene here. There's a major blame game beginning within the Republican Party, and there are major questions about whether the party will be able to move on with other items on its agenda. And let's end with a cartoon. This is from the Columbia Daily Tribune in Missouri by John Darko. I like this cartoon. You can see this Republican elephant here saying, well, we thought health reform would be Obama's Waterloo, but we should have been more specific about just who Napoleon was going to be.
We shall see what cartoons it produces over the next 2 weeks as well. Thanks a lot, Flo Vilmer with the papers and Anchor with business.